Plato's Republic, a Socratic dialogue which remains the most studied text of philosophy millennia after its publication. Its vision of truth shining, so to speak, throughout the ages, begins with a seemingly simple question: what is justice? And here I present a radical idea built on the ideas discussed in St. Augustine's The City of God, as well as in Book 1 of Plato's Republic. As Socrates says, can the just, by justice, make men unjust? Can good, by virtue, make men bad? So where the just is the good, so justice both at the individual level and at the collective level then, is the art of making others just and good. Justice must be connected to teleology, the intrinsic purpose to which God himself strives in creation, such that he can identify with the true and good order and superficially separate from himself. Again, the creation is an overflowing of God's creative power into a tangible and extensional reality outside of his essence through this telesis, which maps his essence, but also distills it in a certain sense, such that you can have coherent existence evolution outside of God. So God, but you still have these telons, these attractors, which create true and good order, and then God can identify himself with that, with the structure of the cognitive perceptual syntax of tellers who share and who enact goodness and teleology on earth in their incarnation, and then identify himself with the structure of the patterns which generated that order, and then define, reinforce, and extend his structure and his evolution according to this end, a telos, as the Greeks called it, the intrinsic end and purpose to which God strives in creation. So Thrasymachus contends, in a rather cynical note in Book 1 of Plato's Republic, that justice is nothing but the interest of the stronger. So whatever is in the interest of the government, therefore, because the government has an oligopoly on violence and force, is best. Because if you think about this, any system of government is essentially the same. It's a government enacting its will on a population. It doesn't matter whether that's good or bad order, because justice is just the interest of the stronger. So the seeming incongruity between the interest of the stronger and the intrinsic purpose of reality itself is resolved by Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Mark. The Pharisee says, should we pay tribute to Caesar? And he has them bring him a coin and says, whose is this image and superscription? Whose face is on this coin? And they say, Caesar. So he responds very cleverly, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things which are God's. The government, the currency, the diluted human utility of the monetary economy, and the expression of violence and force and power which is intrinsic to government structures, especially ones which have become corrupted. I'm not anti-government. Well, I am in some sense, but all of that diluted utility, all of that fake telesis is in the image of Caesar, but every human being, all of reality, in fact, is made in the image of God. So what he's saying coyly is take this coin and tell Caesar to shove it where the sun don't shine. Sell all you have, give it to the poor, take up your cross daily, and follow me. You have to comport to God. Has the greatest power. He's the creator, literal creator and king of all of existence. The advantage of the stronger clearly is his and his only. So then, by the incarnation, this is the Christian story, that he becomes an objective standard of goodliness and morality by his incarnation as an embodied ethic of care and divine justice, whereby we can participate in that essence. It says, for Saint Anastasius, one of the early church fathers, says, for the Son of God became man, that man might become God. This is the Logos. This is John Scotus's idea. The Logos is that which calls creation back to its creator. It's this implicate order which is the top of the pyramid of all of reality, which generates and is also the material, formal, efficient, and final cause of everything in existence. So Coronius Focus discusses this idea of the Logos, which is identified with both God and Christ, which is, of course, not only the metalinguistic structure which gives rise to reality and is identified with God's existence and evolution. This is John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But it's also something we can participate in by participation in the intrinsic ends and purposes and teleology of the Word, which is self-identification. In Platonic metaphysics, the world soul, the Holy Spirit, authors existence such that it can define, reinforce, and extend the structure of the divine mind, nous, and it can identify with something separate from itself. This is the one God, the form of the good, the overflowing of that creative power is for the extension of its structures. The Logos is not only the principle which underlies all of creation, but it's truthful perception manifested in the universe as a creative and regenerative force. God defines himself by the structure of the secondary utility, which comports with his essence. The morality, the teleology, is not something which hovers above God, and it's also not an arbitrary decision of God. It is his very essence. It is his being, and our participation in that being is how we can make contact with the transcendent. And this force is what drives life forward. It's the telos which stands behind biological evolution. It says in John 1, it says, "In him was life, and the life was the light of all men." And the word became flesh. It's an embodied ethic by which we can participate in God and Christ's essence. Christ is the human terminus of the God-man relationship. And so Jesus in that sense is what biology is striving towards. Chris Langan, a self-taught reality theorist and the author of the CTMU, I'm sure pretty much everyone who watches this video knows who Chris Langan is, but he says, that Son of Man can perhaps be most fruitfully interpreted as the descendant by God and therefore the spiritual successor of man. Think about it as a spiritual kind of speciation by which a lower species regeneratively evolves into a higher one through concordance with this logos, with this teleology. And so it, not the standard interpretation of the phrase, but it reflects the notion that Jesus is the human terminus of the God-man relationship and a human gateway to salvation. You have to conform to the structure. You have to conform to the way, the truth, and the life. The way is a path of access. These were actually the three gates of the Temple of King Solomon. The way is a path of access. Truth denotes inclusion in reality, and truthful representations is the same thing as goodliness, because it's truth's very being, which is how we can, because the logos is the correct objective modeling of reality such that we can love and serve God in the manner that's most advantageous to his intrinsic structure. And then so Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." So you have to live the life of Jesus Christ, who inheres in your soul. Christ is the vicar of God. The vicar of Christ in your soul is your conscience, is the voice of goodliness which drives you forward in the world. So where the self is, and where us individuals need to conform to a certain way of life through works and faith, where the self is not defined in terms of just the individual level, where this isn't Ayn Rand, this is, big league theology. We're not objectivists. The self is not just defined in the individual level, but also the societal level. In order to have a good and holy society, you need to be guided by the logos in order to create the most true and good order in the individual. This is what Plato talks about. The friction between the just individual and the just state lights a spark which illumines the collective soul. And you can think of this collective soul as the form of the good and is identified with the structure of God as he inheres in creation. And how does God inhere in creation? This is through the person of Jesus Christ. So the goal of the state, because Augustine is trying to figure out this political philosophy in the light of the early Christian church, the goal of the state must be the salvation of individuals. But we don't want a philosopher king like Plato. We want God as king. Augustine, it said St. Augustine baptizes Plato. And you can think about this, everyone on the political left, the political right, it doesn't matter, these types, everyone wants to twist the world according to their own idea in their mind of what would be good. Everyone has an agenda. They think, if we enact this 5-year plan, put such and such in a kulak, everything will be great. But it turns out that reality is actually a lot more complicated. You can't twist the fabric of reality without it snapping back at you. And so if you're lying and cheating and stealing your way towards a noble goal, this is what Jordan Peterson talks about as one of the major lessons of the 20th century, is that hundreds of millions of people died in the service of utopia. I mean, look at Joseph Stalin, look at Mao Zedong, the Bolshevik revolutions. You see that even as they're saying these lofty principles, they're literally slaughtering millions of people. Look at the Bolshevik Revolution out of pure hate, and especially they're doing it out of pure hate for the intrinsic order. They hate, Christianity in particular was a driving force behind the Bolshevik Revolution. They hate, people who have been industrious and created true and good order in their lives and have been rewarded with capital. It's this resentment which disguises itself in lofty words, this politically correct language, which is actually just masking this deep evil. And so everyone wants to comport, and so everyone is saying that they want to twist the world to the plan they have in their head, but you actually have to do something else. You have to trust in God's plan for the world. This is what Isaiah talks about in the Bible. He says they take no note of what God is designing, that there's actually something which God is using you for, and you're not meant to. You can't necessarily know the full scope of the implication for that. You have to follow that. The lesson, which I think is an aspect of psychological maturity, is that political rule can't actually achieve true excellence in organization. It's just a stronghold and a limited peace against the forces of disorder and evil. We can't really achieve collective redemption or happiness through the state. The goal of the good and just state is to allow good and just individuals to do the most good and justice. You don't want something like in the USSR where goodness and justice is actively persecuted. You can't have religion or do good deeds, and you have to report on your neighbors. We obviously don't want that, so you have to have a stronghold against that through good and peaceful order. The good and justice has to actually be created as a collective by us, by the individual choices of people, which is allowed by God, which is allowed by the state, but not caused by the state. Because if the state is trying to push a certain agenda, it's going to end up not following God's agenda, but following its own agenda, because it has certain power motivations. It's always, trying to reap a certain utility, which can grow parasitic if unchecked. So everything participates in the form of the good, according to Plato. The good is the metaphysical pattern, the form which generates all of the metaphysical patterns from which the physical universe arises. And Augustine shows that this form must be a personal creator and king, and every essence we find in the world thusly emanates from the mind of God. The forms reside in the mind of God as metaphysical patterns of being which can attract particular states towards a certain end and purpose. This is what God is designing. This is Langen's kind of breakthrough, that there, in terms of explaining teleology, is that there are particular telons, an intrinsic utility function determined by the structure of human beings and their goals and purposes, and God's global goals and purposes for reality, which can guide the evolution of galaxies, biological life, and even societal and communal changes, which coalesce timelines to actualize an end which is utile to God or to human beings. God creates by speech. Remember Genesis 1. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But language is not merely vocalized or written communication, but it's the intrinsic communication special to the evolution of the cosmos, an extended superposition whereby distantly related events and objects can cohere with one another. And it's this order, this word, the logos, which is the metalinguistic identity of reality, which weaves and binds heaven and earth, or alternatively the world of forms and the world of appearances. Plato finds his home in God. So there's a major departure from Plato and Augustine, because in Plato, God basically rearranges pre-existing matter. But in Augustine, because you have to comport with the biblical cosmology, God creates everything out of nothing. God doesn't just rearrange pre-existing matter. He creates both form and matter, and is thus the material, formal, efficient, and final cause of all that exists. And thusly, we're obeying his commandment and not trying to push an ideology, trying to define good and evil on our own terms, apart from the teleology of God, which is his very being. Everything disintegrates. We are not, like Aristotle thought, trying to increase eudaimonia, the happiness and meaning and sensible living in this world, but we're trying to actualize a metaphysical pattern in the human organization of Earth. We need to restore the heaven-earth space-time order to establish everything within a perfect hierarchy of being. And again, this can't be accomplished really through political organization. It is accomplished by the love and fear of God at the individual level and the communal level, by obedience to his commandment, everyone standing up for what they know is right, speaking the truth, serving God, helping the poor and the sick, advancing the creation of meaning and quality of human civilization. This is what St. Augustine says. He says, "Pride is the beginning of sin. And what is pride but the craving for undue exaltation?" And this is undue exaltation, when the soul abandons him to whom it ought to cleave and as its end, and becomes a kind of end of itself. It's turning away from God. This is our entire culture, is degenerating before our eyes, and God and traditional morality are being subverted. It's the craving for undue exaltation is the driving force in the world. You see this. We have an entire Pride Month. And so why is this happening? And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Augustine had a very clear and succinct answer to this. Evil is the turning away from God and his kingship. Because if you accept the logical necessity of an omnibenevolent God, then from whence does evil arise? It arises because we have local utility functions which he can separate from our intrinsic utility. We can lie and cheat and steal our way through life and totally ignore God and morality, and at least extrinsically live a good life, perhaps not a fulfilling one, but nevertheless. And so this is why it's so important that we need to create alternative communities. This is what Julius Evola talked about, is this idea of men among the ruins, that I'm talking with Erval on Friday, who's very much trying to build these intentional communities, build schools which can preserve Western civilization. And you look, these small intentional communities are what drive forced civilization. You see the Jesuits, the scholastics in Catholicism. You see the Pythagoreans and the Neoplatonists. This is what it's a small group of people intentionally getting together to do something important. So this is how we can preserve this, is to have intentional communities which have a very, very well-defined morality, which are for the education and rearing of the best of all possible worlds. And so this is St. Augustine's idea of the dualism between the city of God and the city of man. The city of man is something like Rome. It's, people, and and everyone has their own. It's the invisible hand of, let's say, the market. It's everyone has different desires for money and power and relationships, etc. And they organize but their driving principle is material ends. It's an egregore which allows for this coherent organization, but nevertheless is not identified with the being, the teleology of God. The city of God is different. This is what St. Augustine identifies with the church, is it's people who are intentionally organized towards spiritual ends. And so God, and they're organized to love and serve God. And so you have to have, and so this is the point of life, and the point of civilization is to live in such a way that we can bask in the light of the Godhead as a collective, to advance civilization to the point where unimaginable holiness and purity can emerge. And this can only form if our organizing principle is God, is that logos. And this happens not through central planning, but through through small groups of people creating the city of God for themselves and for others. We don't want a tech singularity where everyone has a Neuralink chip and they own nothing and are happy and everyone's little docile slaves to the international mercantile class and technocratic totalitarian permanent AI lockdown police states, or worse. We want a human singularity where we recognize that as agent level tellers, we have the duty and the privilege to love and to serve God in everything we do as individuals, as communities, and as societies. So we can have institutes of learning like the old monastic orders where people devote their entire lives to theology and to clean living. So this is what I'm really excited about at the moment, is that however effective this is, ultimately redemption won't come from YouTube videos. It will come from the conscious and intentional organization of people towards the logos. Through what we really need is a new foundational view of reality, which can actually explain the structure of scientific observation, provide an objective standard for ethics, for metaphysics, and how human communities can relate to one another, have this meta-religion whereby we won't have this constant infighting between, oh, you're a Muslim and I'm a Hindu, so let's duke it out. We'll recognize that everything is for the greater glory of God, and we'll organize ourselves as individuals, as communities, as societies, as a human race according to that end, and we'll be able to pass through the great filter, because ultimately, if you really think about it, Jesus Christ is the great filter. So this is what Chris Langan says. He says, either absolute truth will prevail, or humankind will not achieve its destiny, cannot unify with God, and cannot pass through the great filter. Absolute truth is the vessel which carries the spark that will rekindle the creative fire of mankind. So we need to move past whatever the hell it is happening right now. We're in a very bad situation, but it's the friction between the just individual and the just community which creates the spark, which illumines the collective soul, and as Chris Langan says, rekindles the creative fire of mankind. We can have new art, new culture, new writing, new religious practice. This will all emerge. The CTMU is not an undersized pot which will constrain culture and science and religion. We'll have so much new knowledge, so much new structure to these things, and this will emerge through the building of intentional communities, through the building out of the city of God. Ultimately, we need to do what the church is actually designed to do. We're taking up the mantle of the one holy Catholic apostolic church, because ultimately that's identified not only with the Roman Catholic Church and the structural organization, which is kind of city of manish. It's very, dictated by its subservience to banking over the years and these different power interests and political agendas, and that's very much embedded in the global power structure. But the actual church is the cruciform theocracy, is Christ's kingship over the earth as that through just individuals. So we're in a bad spot, but it can get a lot better. As my friend Greg Wilford said, we need an Enlightenment 2.0 with a re-embrace of God, and the CTMU is what can provide the logical structure to justify Western civilization and God and traditional morality. And despite its claimed rejection of anthropocentrism, the philosophical enlightenment and scientific revolutions of the 19th century very much put the light of human reason at the center of the universe. And yet by the light of their reason, they determine that there is no hierarchy of being in the universe. Everything is relative to everything else, and you see now all this moral relativism and ethical relativism and cultural relativism. We can't make any value judgments about reality. We can't say this is good, this is evil, go away. We assert that there is a center of the universe. It's not a positional center of the sun or the earth as we once thought, but God is the center. Everything emanates from him, and the places where vast assemblies of sentient observer participants can coalesce and have the expression and communication of meaning, and to build these conscious and intentional communities whereby, you know, we can carry the legacy of Western civilization, you know, shoulder the weight of the logos, because this is very much being crushed under the heel of the regime. But we can have this vast meaning making at the agentive level of utility, and then everything else is subordinate to that. So we establish everything within a perfect hierarchy of being through the city of God, and this is how. And I'm going to read even more of this, and it'll get back to you on how this actually relates on how Augustinian theology, because I'm firmly convinced that Augustine is one of the greatest philosophers of all time, if not, I wouldn't say the greatest. He's up there though. He's definitely has a lot of insight. So this is ultimately because we're building out the city of God. This is what needs to be done, because the city of whatever the hell this is, the regime, the new world order, this is very much they don't sleep. They're working 24/7 overtime, but we need to keep our eye on the good. Keep your eye on the kingdom of God, and watch as the kingdom of this earth transforms around you. Let the light shine forth in the darkness. May the peace of our Father in heaven be upon you. Like and subscribe. Peace.